That's fair. I asked my therapist point blank one time if he thought I was autistic. And to be honest, I don't remember what he said, which makes me
Do
think
you
he
think
said
you
no. Well, nice to meet you, number one.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for having me on.
I guess, cause we set this up because I was streaming last week
Yeah.
and, the topic of Satanism came up, of course, because I was talking to Anton.
Oh.
And naturally that's where the conversations will go. And then you mentioned you were a Satanist in the chat. So how did you come across my channel? How did you, I don't know, discover me, I guess?
I don't remember how I discovered you. I discover channels all the time,
Yeah, yeah.
but I watched your debate with Vosh
Mm,
and was very impressed for you and very embarrassed for Vosh. And I watched you and Anton's breakdown of the drag pedagogy paper.
okay.
And so then I started following your channel. I was watching the live stream last week and I had left the room briefly and I heard out of the corner of my ear something about Satanists and psychopaths, and I ran back in the room and I'm like, "What?" And then you said that they're out to troll Christians or something, which is mostly true for a lot of them. So I
Yeah,
typed in the chat like, "Hey, I'm a
I
Satanist. I'm
know.
not
Well,
a psychopath."
that work. Yeah, that's fair. Well, that's an example of synchronicity. I'm sure Anton would agree.
Yes, that's exactly what I thought at the
Right,
time.
right, right. Of course, Satanism was not the planned topic, but it happened to be that there was a Satanist in the chat. By the way, I have my red glow, for hailing Satan. I figured was thematic. Okay, well, so can I read your Twitter bio?
Yeah.
Because let me just say, in total honesty, you seem like a very interesting person, which is why I'm excited to have this conversation. So this is your bio. Former problem child, current bad boy peer counselor, men's mental health, gay MRA / homocon. Does that mean men's rights activist? And
Yes.
then
And
homocon is
homo conservative.
homo conservative, autistic rationalist, proud. I don't want to say that. I don't know if it's a
Is your YouTube channel at risk?
maybe yes. So I'll skip that one. And
I
then
got banned from Reddit for saying it. So
okay, yes. Well, Twitter I guess finds it
I'm
okay.
Cajun. So it's the slang for
I
Cajun.
figured. Okay, yeah. So Cajun, and then Ave Satanist means
Hail Satan.
hail Satan. There
Ave
we go.
Satanist.
Yes. Okay. Well, so I guess I don't even know where to start. Do you want to just kind of give some background on you and what, like, how you can, or what your interest is in these spaces and all that?
I don't know where to start either. As far as these spaces, during COVID, I started a podcast with some friends and we live streamed it just like you're doing now. So I'm kind of impressed with that format. I hang out in a lot of live stream. I'm a community builder. That's one of my passions.
Sure.
And we were very successful at building this little community of really smart, creative, autonomy, self-determination were the values we were collecting around. We built it mostly out of our live stream. So that kind of drew me to your
Damn.
space.
Okay.
And I've been podcasting for several years. It's one of my favorite hobbies. I have run a few Discords. During COVID, me and some peers up here ran a 24-hour Zoom drop-in that we kept
Really?
going. Yeah, it was, everybody was isolated. Some people didn't
Mm-hmm.
have anyone to talk to. They could drop in. We did arts and crafts, classes, workshops, watched
Sure.
movies, did open mic night, all kind of fun things.
Yeah. Well, I've in the last couple, I'd even say weeks, not even months, really in the last couple weeks, because I started my Discord server, and I generally had the opinion that, like, online community is a very weird thing, and it's not, because obviously there's always a small, there's always a number of genuine, like, mentally ill people, psychopaths, that type of crew who can ruin any online space, and you have, like, the anonymous aspect to it and all that. But as I've talked to people like Anton or like John Pike, Bridges, the League of Legends fan, unfortunately, the classic mode fan. I've talked to other people, and it's like, it's really like a networking aspect. There's a you can connect with people who, have similar interests and all that. So I'm increasingly sympathetic and have a positive attitude towards kind of the online community aspect of things. Um, so how did you get into Satanism, though? That's what is your what is your relationship to Satanism and maybe Satan too? I don't know if you know.
Well, I've always been a Satanist my whole life. I just didn't know that was what it was called. Short story, I watched the Hell Satan documentary on Hulu one day, and I'm like,
Okay.
that's me. I gotta find those people. And like the very next day, I went on the website and joined the Satanic Temple. And this was late 2019, so just before COVID. So I really didn't get a chance to. I tried to meet a few local Satanists, but there's this big gatekeeping process you got to go through, and I never did get to meet any. Then COVID hit, so I found a satanic Discord that I started hanging out on, and Satanism went woke, or at least the Satanic Temple. Like they were policing everyone's pronouns. It's all about social justice, and
Interesting.
I'm like, this is not what I joined up for. I joined for the anti-authoritarianism. In fact, one of the biggest appeals to me was one of their tenets, the fourth tenet. The freedoms of others should be respected, including the freedom to offend. To willfully and unjustly encroach upon the freedom of another is to forego one's own. And I'm like, oh, good. Well, this makes me woke proof because it's a religious value of mine
Right.
to defend the freedom to be offended. So when I joined the Satanists, I said, this is why I joined. Anti-authoritarianism. Don't tell me how to talk. Don't tell me what to do and what I have to call people and all this. It was so counter to the whole reason
Yeah.
that I was drawn to Satanism in the first place. So I went independent, and I've been independent ever since.
You're a
And
Protestant
because
Satanist, kind
I
of.
I, I am, I was actually raised Catholic, but my specific brand of Satanism, which I'm kind of developing for myself, it's non-theistic, so I don't actually believe in a Satan, is very
Okay,
much
so
based on the Protestant devil, not the Catholic one. John
yeah.
Milton, Paradise Lost.
Okay, so that was what I was gonna ask. So you because like a Christian believes like Jesus Christ, is the Son of God. So you're a Satanist, but do you think there's actually a Satan floating around or wherever he is in hell and all that?
No, I think there's evil. There's human evil, but I don't think it's
Hmm.
necessarily supernatural. There are theistic Satanists. I just happen to not be one of them. I suppose you could have a non-theistic Christianity. There are plenty of Buddhists that are
Mm-hmm.
non-theistic Buddhists.
Mm-hmm. Jordan Peterson's arguably a non-theistic Christian in a lot of
Yeah,
ways.
I admire the figure of Christ. Like I have no. So when I joined Satanism, I guess my whole life, my mom, my family's religious. My mom was religious. I was going to hell my whole life. I always thought religious people were stupid. I didn't necessarily hate
Mm.
them, but I just didn't relate to them. And then when I became a Satanist, after being an atheist for most of my adult life, all of a sudden I started to I had a religion now. So I found this whole new respect for
Mm.
Christians and
Interesting.
religious people. And I tried to go back to be an atheist and I can't. Like it's too barren and sterile. There's something missing.
Right. All the
So now
fun
that I have
people, all the fun people are in hell, and that's what makes
yeah.
Satanism fun, right?
And one of your commenters in the chat said that it's religion for edgier atheist or so, which is kind of true. And that's what I thought it was at first, but it's something a little more than that. And I found that out when I tried to go back to the atheism and experiment with giving up the Satanism.
Well,
Since I,
what's the bigger aspect to it? Because it's not a belief in Satan. It's not a belief in a
no,
deity or something.
it's an archetype. It's an aesthetic. It's an ethos. It gives me a framework for making meaning and understanding my life. It's a form of mythological thinking, which I think was missing from the atheism. You can't just live on strict logic. Um,
Mm.
there were parts of me that were not getting their needs met
Hmm.
that Satanism kind of opened me up to. And I've like I said, I've been a Satanism my whole life. I grew up during the Satanic Panic, and I had like 3 or 4 strikes against me. I played Dungeons and Dragons, which was devil worship back in that day.
Naturally.
I listened to rock music, devil. I was gay, devil. So, and I was in a very small town. So, I was the lone devil worshiper in the town that the whole town thought was a devil worshiper.
Sure.
So I carried that stigma with me my whole life. I used to burn, I had this black robe from Saudi Arabia that somebody gave our family, and I used to burn black candles in the backyard because I wanted the neighbors to see me and think I
Right.
fed that, so they'd leave me alone, and it worked.
Yeah. Okay. So that So two things, point and then a question. That I think that kind of mentality is what I was referring, is what I think of when I think of like I see videos of people go into their city hall dressed up like almost like a Halloween costume version of like the devil or whatever. And it's like, okay, these people are pretty clearly just they don't like Christianity, and there's obviously valid reasons to not like Christianity, especially if you're like the victim of religious abuse, which I know people are. So I have sympathy for that perspective. And they're just kind of doing it to point out this is absurd and oh, if you get your religious protections, well, we're going to take advantage of it too. It's kind of like, with like the whole pronoun thing. It's like, well, technically, if you can identify as whatever you want, well, then I might as well just identify as, transgender or something like that. And then now I'm a protected class and I'm protected by the Constitution in ways that I wasn't 5 seconds ago. And it's kind of like it's kind of a stick it to the ideology type deal. So that's where my mindset was.
That was part of it.
Yeah. Okay.
Just the fact that he had that IRS status really impressed me. I'm like, oh,
yeah, right.
I can legally be a Satanist now.
Yeah, it's like the loopholes.
Can't be discriminated against, and it allowed me to take it more seriously than just cosplay.
Right. So, okay. So you mentioned it's like an archetype to live. It's like it's an orienting principle, which is interesting because
Yes.
I've always that's if you accept the maps of meaning perspective, which is that reality is a story. We live in something that is fundamentally more like a story than it is an objective reality, so to speak. Then you have to have a story to orient yourself. You have to have something that guides you. And it's almost, as long as it's archetypal, it's going to contain some aspect of truth. So whether it's Christianity or whether it's Satanism or whether it's Star Wars or whatever, those stories all contain a common element underneath it. And that common element is real in some sense. It's archetypal. And you mentioned, so like, okay, it made me think of Tyrion Lannister from Game of Thrones. Have you seen Game of Thrones by any chance?
No.
Okay. You know Tyrion Lannister? He's the shorter guy.
I'm a little out of touch with pop
That's fair.
culture
Okay,
lately.
I wouldn't worry about it because it was the best show on television until the last season came out, and then it became arguably the worst show on television. But that's a separate issue. There's a line where he's a dwarf. He's I believe the politically correct term would be little person today. But he's a dwarf, and in the show, it's a big theme is that he's always getting mocked and made fun of, and his father hates him because he was born a dwarf. And he says something he's talking to someone who's got their own problem, and he says something like, "You should wear paraphrasing, you should wear your insecurities as armor, and then it never can be used against you." And your point about like you already had a target on your back, and then you went around and did the candles anyway, almost to kind of like
I just wanted them to leave me alone.
Yeah,
just anything to make these people leave me alone. And it worked.
So can you explain that, I guess, a little bit more? Because wouldn't it have drawn you more ire?
It didn't. It was a small religious. They were mostly religious Christians, and I think the fear outweighed the.
So they were
like the scarier I could make myself.
So
the more likely they were.
Yeah, you'd rather.
Like
have
I'm
them
sure
be
they
afraid
talked
of
about
you.
behind my back and stuff, but at least to my face, I could make it through the school day without getting too much harassment.
So it was better to be feared than it was to be a victim or something.
Yeah, I guess so.
Interesting.
Like it was my way. I mean, I knew I couldn't fight back, so it was
Sure.
my way of protecting myself, I guess.
So what is your how does Satanism play in your life now? Are you still you're doing your own independent brand? Do you have like a community of Satanists or something? Or
I'd love to find one if there are any Satanists out there. Especially, I'm in north of Seattle, so if there are any in Snohomish County, let me know.
Of course, the Satanist is from Seattle. That's fair. That's thematically appropriate.
I hated Seattle. Oh, I couldn't wait to move out of there. My mental health skyrocketed the day I drove out of that city.
When you left Seattle?
Yeah. I was there for the riot. Like that happened right outside my window. The Starbucks
really?
got set on fire 3 times. The Chaz was 5 blocks from my house.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. You were
So
you
not
were
only
near an
did I see it on
independent country.
TV, I watched it outside my window. It was very visceral for me. And that was
Wow.
one of my turning points when I started to leave the left.
Interesting. So yeah, I was going to ask because you said you're a homocon in your Twitter bio, so you've leaned more conservative in recent times. So what?
I do now, yeah.
Yeah. What was the evolution of that? So I mean, obviously
George Floyd.
Right.
The fact that we were supposed to be on lockdown following the science, and suddenly this political agenda carried more weight than they were actually like. So I was locked down. I was wiping down my groceries, wearing my mask,
Yep.
doing everything. And all of a sudden, we had permission to go out and protest for a political cause and put ourselves. It's the cognitive dissonance was too much.
Okay,
And
that's so interesting because I also there was a period of time where I was wiping down packages and all that at the very beginning when we didn't know how bad it was and
yeah,
all
we
that.
didn't know.
Um, and I distinctly remember, and you know what's funny, or rather scary, is there absolutely were articles or like messaging from the CDC that said protesting is allowed outside in groups of like 100 or less or something like that. They like, to your point, it was like, lockdown, lockdown, lockdown. Oh, but now there's reason to riot, so the CDC's changing its guidelines. You can't find those. I can't find those
Oh,
articles. So and I spent like 20, 30 minutes, this was some time ago, trying to find like, the CDC has, announcements on its website. They've scrubbed those. So you can't find, and if someone is able to, who's watching this, I would appreciate it dearly, to find an article from the CDC that when they said that, but they basically memory hold it. They erased it. Oh, that didn't happen. Which is exactly, because that's exactly one of those things that I think would have converted a lot of people, and that certainly sticks in my head. But,
it broke trust.
yeah,
And like what you're saying now, that just reinforces it.
right. And
I don't trust them anymore.
yeah, and this,
And I watched Benjamin Boyce's Evergreen documentary. It's like
mhm.
30 hours of footage at around the same time. So all of that together kind of woke me up. I couldn't believe what was going on at that college. And the administration, the faculty were the ones enabling it to happen.
Yeah,
And I was horrified. I'm like, I can't believe this is the future that people want for society.
interesting.
So I started finding these anti-woke groups. I started my podcast. CTA, which is Critical Therapy Antidote, was a group of mental health professionals that were pushing back against the encroachment of social justice into therapy. So I joined them and got involved. And we partnered with Counterweight, Alan
Sure.
Pluckrose's
Yep, Alan Pluckrose.
organization. I started doing the support Zooms and listening sessions for her.
So what do you do for work or for in your free time or?
I'm a peer counselor. I moved all my work online during COVID, and I'm freelancing right now. I'm about to launch my own website,
Okay,
go into
what is
self-employment.
a peer counselor, a like a social worker or?
No, it's mental health, but it's from lived experience. Like I have PTSD and other mental health issues, so I can help someone with the same issues based on my own experience with it, not
Sure.
necessarily clinical from a clinical perspective.
Right.
So it's more
Okay.
like it's a mutual support and more like
Yeah.
coaching than it is.
Right. Like
The,
like coaching. I was gonna say. I know
yeah,
that doesn't require um, full on like licensing and all that. Okay.
yeah. There's a certification process and training you have to go through.
Got
So
it. Okay.
I have
So
that.
how long have you been a peer counselor?
Uh, Probably about 8 years. I think in 2015 is when I got my certification.
Okay. So and if I'm asking too many details, feel free to just let me know. We can move on to something else or change it. But what kind of problems have you helped people with, or like when someone comes to you, what do
Well,
you
I
help them with,
started
and
on
how do you do
the
that?
local crisis line. I did that for about a year as a volunteer. So just people in crisis. My background is really trauma. I work a lot with autistic people, ADHD, gifted people, neurodivergent people. That's the crowd that gravitates to me that I seem to work best with. And I've shifted to exclusively men in the past few years because men are underserved. They're not getting their mental health needs met. Um, I do a lot of community building too, because the power of having a healthy community has a mental health benefit of its own outside of just individual one-on-one support. So I try to build healthy communities that people can come to and kind of be a part of and
Right.
get increased benefit from that.
Sure. What's the typical, someone sends you an email or something and says, "Hey, I'm struggling with such and such," or how, what kind
Yeah,
of issues have you
right
encountered?
now it's word of mouth and through just my existing network. But when I launch my website in a couple of weeks, it's going to have a booking system where they could just schedule a call directly with me, and then we'll see if I'm a fit for them or if I'm able to help them.
Sure. And you said it's usually people with like PTSD or
Yeah, that's my particular background, is trauma. I have a lot of trauma. I've worked with a lot of trauma. I worked inpatient psych for a little while, adolescent psych in New Orleans, and so got a lot of like firsthand experience with some really intense
mm,
trauma and psychosis.
interesting. Okay. If I may ask, and again, let me know if it's too much detail or not, but what is like when you say you've got trauma, is it trauma from, I mean, obviously you mentioned that you were bullied and kind of ostracized because you grew up in a super religious town and you were isolated in that regard, or you know, what is your experience that you're able to draw from to help others?
That's some what I call social trauma. So I have plenty of that from. I mean, I've always Satanism is the religion of the outsider, the misfit, so the outcast, the scapegoat. I've always been that. So that's social trauma, and it's definitely influenced my development. But in 2007, I watched my fiance, my partner, die in the ICU in front of my eyes. We were together for about 8 years. This was in Las Vegas, and it absolutely shattered me. Like I've never been the same since. Like that kind of trauma, it's almost a form of brain damage. And I honestly don't know how I got through it. Something just got me through. I wasn't even in reality for weeks, and eventually I started to come out of it. And a friend of mine talked me into moving back to New Orleans and like rejoining civilization and getting a job. And
Community.
that's when I got the job in the psych ward. And eventually, somehow, at post traumatic growth, I managed to put a life together back for myself. Then a couple of years later, I met a guy in Seattle who was also gifted, autistic, on the spectrum. Like we very much were similar neurotypes. And he talked me into making a move up here. So I kind of just took a leap of faith and gave everything up that I had built and came to Seattle with nothing. Complete psychopath. I lived with him in his home for about 2 months. It was abusive, intense, traumatic.
Wow.
And I thought it was just him. Like he's just a really disturbed, messed up person. But then when I left him and started making my way in Seattle, half the population is is like that. Like they have similar feature. He was very woke, um, very authoritarian, social. It's kind of a social bullying and intimidation, like you see with the tactics they use. Very
Mm.
anti-male. Um, uh, uh, I don't know. The culture here is so bizarre. And coming from the South,
Mm.
the two things they hate are men and Southerners, and I was both. So I had this stigma hanging over my head, similar to what I had growing up, for different
Right,
characteristics.
right.
And
I
it
was
was
just gonna say.
much, much worse as an adult being
Wow.
male in the Pacific Northwest than it was being gay in Trump country in southern Louisiana. Like hands down,
Yeah.
not even a contest.
Wow. Yeah. The re-immersion into, yeah, being bullied and ostracized and all that. I can totally see how.
And from my own team, like these were liberals, Democrats. Like this was the team that historically would support me against
Right.
the, and so it was coming from like inside the house. And that's what really threw me.
Wow.
Like I became demonized. I became the scapegoat, the satanic figure all over again. And Satan is kind of the adversary against the church or the religion. So when I converted, I thought, because that's what most of the Satanists do, that I'd be anti-Christian, and finally this is a chance to stick it to the Christians. And I found the complete opposite. I found myself being more empathetic toward Christians because they had a religion and I understood it now. A lot of Christians and I started talking and becoming allies. I started finding a lot of, because I have a Catholic background, Catholics. I was getting in touch with more Catholics, and mo- uh, a large portion of my allies and friends right now are Christians. And we get along much better than I even do atheists. So what I realized was, I think it's John McWhorter that sees woke as a
Mm-hmm.
form of Puritanism or
Yeah.
like that's
It's a
the
religion.
religion that I'm a Satan again. I'm a Satan for the woke religion, not for the Christian religion like I thought it would be.
Wow.
And
Wow.
so I'm in opposition to everything that the woke stand for, and I don't care if I offend them. They're welcome to scapegoat me, bring it on. I'm a lightning rod for all of that. So I'm never going to be accepted in their circles or in their church, and I let them know from the beginning. Like I want them to see the horns and the tail right
Right.
away.
Wow. Well, amen. No pun intended to that. But man, that's interesting. So, so from your perspective, do you see in obviously in your circles, like you were just saying, your allies are kind of it's against the Church of Woke. Do you think that this is a broader phenomenon in that, I know like people leave the left. I hear that term all the time. I left the left or whatever, something like that. But I also know people are moving left because the conservatives are kind of getting too strong or whatnot. I guess, what is your perspective on where society is moving in terms of, do you think the reaction to the Church of Woke is going to be stronger than the reaction of like the far right and kind of the, trying to bring back Christian morality and all that weird stuff? Because it seems to me, because I totally obviously sympathize with the pushing back against the Church of Woke. Because Christianity and people are less religious nowadays, like it's the church is not nearly as an influence as it was previously. But now I'm seeing it start to resurge a bit, and I can see how that's going to push people back. So I don't know, what is your kind of perception of the landscape in terms of these two twin opposing religious institutions, the Church of Woke and the original church?
Well, I don't know how opposed they actually are, because there's a lot of Christian churches that are even going woke. I think we've passed a point. We've passed a turning point. I don't think there's a going back, and I'm not optimistic for the future. This is the feminization of society. This is very female, feminist driven. It's that set of values that's displacing the more rational male values that we were based on. And I don't see it stopping, because I'm shocked at how far it's gotten to begin with. Like, even males I know, highly intelligent males that know better, have somehow succumbed to it. Like they have a way of getting people to buy into and adopt these values.
Okay,
even people that I wouldn't think would
do
like
that.
capitulate to it.
Sure. Okay, let me ask you this. Let's just clarify, because this is a broader conversation I hear being held often. So what is your perspective? You said we're kind of feminizing society a bit, or men are being feminized and embracing
everyone, all of them.
Sure, everyone. Okay, so I guess how would you define that? What would be an example of that? What do you mean?
Well, you see it in the Stanford case with free speech over safety. The dean, the DEI dean, came out and said you have to balance free speech with the potential harm, and so it's safetyism versus the free inquiry and open pursuit of truth. It's infantilization. It's black people who are helpless victims, and they need the white people to come in and fight against the oppression.
The Robin
for them.
DiAngelos speak on behalf of the black people.
Yeah,
she supposedly cares about.
Satanism is the religion of individuality, personal freedom, autonomy, self-determination. It's antithetical to all of that. It's you're helpless. We need you. You need us to do. It's collectivism.
So why do you say it's the feminizing rather than just the weakening in general?
Because I think a lot of those values are more important to women than they are to men. Like I run a lot of men's groups, and we don't police each other's speech. We're not threatened that someone's going to say something that's going to harm someone else. I'm in a lot of groups that I end up having to leave often, because you'll make a post and they'll police the language. Well, think about how you phrased it and the harm it could do. That is not something that men do. That is something that women do, because they protect the innocent, the vulnerable, they're nurturers.
Okay, so
it's maternalism.
Yeah, okay. So I understand what you're saying. And I certainly, in my experience, when I was in high school and, in college, I had basically in high school, I had two groups of friends. And one was the hipsters and one was the jocks. That's how I categorized it. And I was sort of the in between in either way. And with my hipster friends, they were more of that, super caring, super like, yo, I got your back, bro. Like, you're the best. I love you. All that type of stuff. And then with my jock friends, it was like, fuck you to your face. It was who can riff on each other more. And it was interesting because there were positive and negatives of both of those communities, where my hipster friends, like if I was doing something creative, like if I was doing this YouTube channel, then, I get a lot of support from them. Oh, absolutely, dude, you're doing well. Like, I'm happy to support you. Whereas my masculine friends, if we're feminine to masculine, hipster and jock is the dichotomy I'm trying to map it onto. Where my jock friends would be like, "Oh fuck you," and go find ways to critique it or whatnot. And it's like, okay, well, the classic progressive viewpoint of that is like, oh well, that just proves like that's toxic masculinity, and all that. But it was interesting because that was that was one difference, but then there was another difference that was switched where my hipster friends would always talk behind each other's back and put on these fake smiles. And like, if they had a problem with you, they'd never bring it up to your face. It'd always be some passive aggressive bullshit.
Very conflict avoidant.
Right. Whereas my jock friends, it was like, well, I'm not, I have my issues with them, but I'm never worried that like they're talking behind my back because they'll say whatever they have to my face. So you always knew where you stood. And
Yes.
that was, I didn't, and I was talking just recently to one of my more progressive friends who would fall into that more hipster category. And he was telling me like, Paul, I'm not really in those spaces that are, he called it the hyper-masculine spaces where people just shit on each other to their face. And he's like, that's why I appreciate you, because we can do that with each other. And it's like, there's absolutely a big value of, I don't think you can truly be friends with someone unless you regularly get in fights and air stuff out to their face, because no one will ever get along with someone perfectly because people are different, and that's just a fact. So there will always be conflict, and it's much better to have a relationship with someone who will throw it to your face and tell you and tell that. So I sympathize with that, and I can understand in even the language of like feminine versus masculine. If you think about it like archetypally, like there's positive and negative aspects to both the feminine and both the masculine.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's not so much that I guess the desire to push back to the degree that there is one when it's like we're feminizing men. Like I was raised by boomers. My dad's 68. And so we never talked about like emotions and feelings and all that stuff, which certainly had its disadvantages that I've understood later in life. But, there's also like I learned a lot of resilience and independence that a lot of people appears to not understand. Like the idea of, like my dad encouraged me almost to like not care what he would think in a lot of ways of like, well, why are you asking me? Like, just go do something. Here's $20. Get on your bike, go hang out with your friends. And I have friends who are like, I don't want to vape because my parents might think they might get upset with it or something. It's like, dude, you're 25. Like, what do you give a shit what they think, And so it's interesting to see like there is absolutely a balance where you can be over like, oh, we care about your feelings. Like, how do you feel about this and all that? It's like, that's definitely a risk. Just as, and the left or the feminine, whatever side is pointing that out or is saying like, well, we need to get people to be in touch with their feelings so that the people who like my parents, my dad in particular, was not like particularly, again, emotional. That had its problems. So they're pointing out, well, we should move towards the more, let's just talk about our feelings and everything. But there's an equal danger, which is, well, then you just become a little bitch. And it's just like, oh, well, my feelings are hurt. So this grants me some moral plane to stand on. And so I get that. And clearly you've seen that in your perspective as well.
And it's not that I don't care about people's feelings. I care about people. I care deeply about people's feelings.
Well,
I
right,
don't
exactly. You're peer
babysit their
counselor.
feelings. I don't
Right.
feel responsible for their feelings. That's for them to manage. So the locus of control for me is different. Did you grow up? Were you millennial?
No, I'm 26.
What does that make you?
So
Are you
I'm
Gen Z?
I'm right in between Gen Z and millennial. I'm like I'm
Where'd you grow up?
suburban Chicago,
Oh, okay.
western suburbs, which is also fun fact where Charlie Kirk and Nick Fuentes grew up.
Oh,
So yeah, I have a bad stain on my reputation from a hometown perspective. But yeah, so yeah, and it's interesting because like I've got friends who their parents are maybe like 40 something, 45-ish, and they're my age. Like my friends are my age. I'm 26, and I've got friends who are 26, and their parents were like mid to late 40s. Whereas my parents are almost 70. So even though I'm the same age as my friends, I was raised by an entirely different generation, right? So I feel like, I have a little bit. I'm more like I don't know. All of my cousins and stuff, they're all like fuck all these, these soft kids nowadays and shit like that. Where I think it's a little bit different, but yeah.
So you're not typical for your culture.
Well, I'm not typical in any regard. I'm not typical for anyone. I'm a singularly weird individual, but I get how old are you? How old are you if you don't mind me?
19.
You're
20, 21. No, I'm 52. I'll be 53 this year. I'm Gen X.
Okay, I was gonna say, is this some sort of satanic
No.
magic? Okay, and so were so you said you were because I'm curious because you said you were kind of like bullied and ostracized by the community. Were your parents buying into that, or were they pretty supportive of you?
No, well, my father was out of the picture pretty early, so it was a single mom. I'm the oldest of 4 kids, and she worked all the time, so we were like latchkey kids. It was very permissive. We didn't have a lot of supervision or authority. We were kind of on our own, figured things out on our own, and did what we wanted. Came and go as we went. So I grew up with a lot of freedom, and I guess I kind of got spoiled because I don't like it when people try to take that away or constrain that, or tell me what to do or try to control me. I've always been that way. There's something called trait reactance, which is a psychological, almost physiological characteristic where your body, your whole nervous system just reacts, like flares up very strongly when someone tries to control you or tell you what to do. And I definitely have that. I'm an Enneagram 8, which is called the Challenger, which if you read the description, it's the satanic personality type almost to a T.
Sure.
So all of that's kind of innate to me. I was my mom said I was off the bottle very early. I was sleeping in my own bed very early. I've always had this strongly independent, autonomous streak. So there's a saying that Satanists are born, not made. So you can't really proselytize or convert. People that are Satanists they'll find their way to it, like I did. Right. It's interesting what you had said about conflict. There's a lot of conflict avoidance in this culture too that I've observed, but how with the jocks you could kind of be a little more open and combat. I do this thing called transformative conflict, where instead of avoiding the conflict, you move into it, deeper into it, and then through it onto the other side. And there's a resolution to it. Everybody comes out even stronger than before the conflict started.
How do you go about doing that? What separates transformative conflict from just telling someone like fuck you to your face?
I think it's a process. I think that it's kind of there's stages and phases to it, and it's organic. It has its kind of its own life, and it's different for each party involved in the conflict in each conflict situation. But it's Thunderdome. Like you go in there and you fight it out and come out on the other side and move.
So you like set expectations and boundaries ahead of time and then engage in the conflict or something?
You can if you need it, or sometimes when the conflict starts, there's ways to just kind of facilitate or steer the direction that it goes while it's happening in a healthy way. A lot of people are afraid to, especially conflict avoidant cultures. They're afraid to like fully express or confront what values or needs are in conflict. So just giving them the freedom and permission to do that.
Interesting.
And you have to have a lot of trust with the other person. That back in the South, we fight all the time. Like you'll be fighting one day, and then you'll be at a barbecue, hanging out, having a ball the next day. And me and my siblings would fight one day, we're playing the next.
Oh yeah.
So you learn that the conflict doesn't mean anything about the relationship. Like that underlying bond and connection relationship is still there.
Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah, I'm the middle child. I have an older brother and a younger brother, and we beat the shit out of each other growing up.
Yeah.
And I know. Speaking of like generations and all that, I think younger generations are more likely to be like only children, and have because people just have less kids, so they have less siblings and all that. And yeah, it's funny. I can remember like times when I was like, I don't know, 7 or 8 years old or something, and me and my brothers were home alone, and my one brother was like on the computer, and he'd been playing for like 2 hours, and I wanted to play, and we would literally just be like screaming at the top of our lungs at each other, like get off, and then we just go beat the shit out of each other and then whine about it. And it's like now when we get back together, we're like smoking cigarettes and stuff, and it's just like funny of just like we'll be like sitting outside the house, just we're all 20 something smoking cigarettes. It's like we've come a long way, guys. We've come a long way, and it's like those bonds are strong precisely because you could have the conflict. It could be absurd to the point where you're like making the other person bleed. But it's like, well, we're still
The relationship is strong enough to absorb it.
Yeah.
Very familiar. And there was a big shift in parenting too, somewhere in the 90s, I'm told. Like the helicopter
Yes, less free
style.
range children. Jonathan Haidt's
We were
big on
free
that.
range. We grew up outside, like climbing trees,
Yep.
falling off bikes, like fighting it out with the neighbor kids. There were no adult. Like we learned a lot from doing that
Yeah,
on
and
our own.
and my dad in particular encouraged that in me. And I looking back, I didn't, it's only in the last couple years that I've thought about it. Of like, man, he was very good about. Again, it'd be summer vacation, and he'd be like, here's $20, get on your bike and go across the street. And it was that type of stuff where, it was like that was a sophisticated approach, because it was like, don't just sit in your room and play video games all day and all that. Just go out
Mm.
and you don't need to ask me for permission as long as you're safe and all that. So, yeah, that's something that
I
I've
think he
learned to
did you
appreciate.
well.
Yes, right.
Now
Um,
it's all screen. The screen they come home, they're on the screens. They never go outside. They don't even go play in the backyard. The activities are structured. My nieces and nephews are all into organized sports. They have all these activities. Their whole day is planned and managed, and they have screens all over the house in every room, and it's just a different
yeah,
environment than we grew up in.
someone posted a video in the Discord about the iPad babies, and it's
Yeah.
like, and it was, and man, we don't know what the effects of that are going to be when you have a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old
They're
constantly.
probably gaining useful skills for today's world, but they're losing some of the more useful interpersonal skills that
Well, one of the points they made, and I think this is a Jonathan Haidt point or something, is like, they've gone, when you're a young child, you engage in imaginative play. So, you have your room and you have to like make something out of
oh
it.
god,
It's
yeah.
it's projecting outwards, right? You're creating. Whereas the iPad babies, the iPad children are consuming constantly. So they're losing that sense of imaginative play, and I think like Jordan Peterson's hypothesis about what's with all this like play about identity. Why are there people identifying as deer and animals and Zimzer and all that? It's like it's a form of delayed play. So because it wasn't integrated when they were children, they have to, as adults, sort of gain in that, well, I'm a this or that. I'm playing. I'm a knight. Like literally, it's the same psychological process when a kid says, I'm a knight in shining armor or blah blah blah, and I'm playing swords or whatever. That's what the adults are doing, except in a more like gender focused way, which is interesting. But
There may be something to that. Eric Erickson had the theory of the developmental stages, and there's certain
hmm
skills developmental milestones that you meet and skills you pick up as you go through them. And if you're not meeting those, then you're going to keep attempting to meet them in your adult life until you.
okay, that's Eric Erickson, because I've heard that
Yeah.
before, and I was talking to a friend about that. Because his fiance is a social worker, and she's been studying for some sort of certification or test, and that was one of those things, is if you don't hit those certain developmental milestones in childhood, they end up manifesting when you're an adult. So that's
Which
interesting.
goes back to the infantilization. Like, when do these kids get to be adults? When do any of us get to be adults and
hmm
choose our own speech, our own words, our own means of self-expression? One of the big things that drew me to Satanism was the pronoun policing. I can't stand that. As an autistic person, that's etiquette. I struggle with that to begin with etiquette, and all it does is heighten the etiquette and make it even. It sets an even higher bar. It's used as a gatekeeping device, and people like me on the autism spectrum, we're the ones they're going to be on the short end of all of that. So I rebelled against it the minute it started because I know the effect that kind of manipulating and playing around with etiquette can have on
Sure.
autistic
Okay.
people.
So when you say etiquette, are you referring to sort of for like the unwritten rules
The
of
unwritten
conversation
rules.
that autistic people have a difficulty?
Yep. And
Interesting.
pronouns are an obvious example of that, but there's so many other unspoken rules
So if
in the woke
so,
side.
could you give, so if you were to meet someone who likes, for the first time, and they said their pronouns, how would that, so you said that would heighten the sense of etiquette. So
Well,
what kind of complications would that have
them
for
saying
you?
it wouldn't for me. Having other people try to get me to say a certain like some of the when I was involved in my peer work in person before COVID, we'd go to workshops or trainings and they do the pronoun badges and all of that. So that kind of stuff. I just say I don't use pronouns or use whatever ones you want.
Mm-hmm.
Or I have a friend that says standard pronouns. When she's asked for pronouns, she just say I use the standard pronouns.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And usually they leave you if they really push it, I just tell them my pronouns and they usually leave me alone. So
And yeah, and they have no right to say otherwise. So wow,
no. I mean I do. My Twitter name used to be Satanic before I changed it.
that's
Because
fair.
when I became a Satanist and we went on lockdown, that's when I really, I mean, I was out at work for a while. I wore my Satan t-shirts. I had some Satan horns I would wear to work because the Satanic Temple, a lot, like over 50% were LGBT, autism, neurodiverse. It was drawing the population that I was already working with. So I convinced my boss that it was a way to like outreach to this population.
Mm-hmm.
And but when I started operating online during COVID, that's when I started using Twitter and social media. And I said, if I'm going to do this Satanism thing, I want to do it openly, like I've done with all of my other identities. And I want to show that it can be a force of good for the world because I truly believe it can. So I want to openly do whatever I do as a Satanist. So I came up with Satanic as the Twitter name, and I started doing my peer work, my mental health work, my autism advocacy, all under the brand of Satanism, trying to be a positive representation
Sure. Well,
for the
you
religion.
know the thing that is sticking with me in this conversation is you said like Satanism is the religion of the outsider, kind of, right? And from like a archetypal perspective, everyone is an outsider to some degree in some form or fashion, right? Because everyone is unique. It's it's like culture is this monotonous thing that flattens you and flattens your individuality. But in order to be part of the culture, you have to sacrifice some level of individuality to,
No,
be part of culture and whatnot. But
no, you don't.
well, well, but
You can find healthy cultures where you can be your authentic self and not have to
well,
compromise it,
what
which is
I
what I try to steer people toward.
right, what I mean is in the most extreme form, like you can't just like say whatever you want that comes off your head. Like if you have a problem with someone and you call them a name rather than like, even though it feels good to like call them a name, you have to sacrifice some level of like just pure. I'm just gonna call you a name to your face versus like let me explain why I have conflict with you in a more sophisticated way, right?
Well, you don't have to. It's a choice. That's what I'm saying.
Well,
It's self. You get to determine the choice for yourself.
sure. Well, I guess,
So there are options.
yeah. What I'm saying is everyone has to agree to be bounded by certain rules if they want to be part of a community, and each community is different in what rules they will bound you to, and some communities are a lot more free flowing. But
Perhaps like
yeah, but
in-group norms and
yeah, exactly. In every community, like you need to have some level of respect for other people in that community, right?
okay.
That's all I'm saying. But my point is, I'm much more sympathetic to, and specifically your point about like you were a Satanist to the original Christian church, but now it's like you're a Satanist to the Church of Woke, which is like the archetype remains the same. You're still the outsider pushing back against the genuinely oppressive norms of whatever the religious dogma happens to be, and right now it happens to be the Church of Woke.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's
And not
interesting.
intentionally pushing back. I just don't fit them. So there's this
Sure.
natural, and I'm not going to back down or change who I am. So
Right.
there's this, we're at a stalemate. There's this natural impasse.
Right.
And
Right.
it
Right.
usually escalates from there. But if they're willing to live and let live, I'm willing to live, but they're not,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't.
Well, that's the I was gonna say the religious left, the whatever the far left. They're making the same mistake that the far right do. Every time the far right, the religious right, try and enforce censorship. Oh, you can't say those things because it's offensive. The natural reaction of most people is, f off, right? And the progressive thing is just the same. Oh, you can't say that. It's like whoever's going after the comedians, you can generally be sure is on the
Yes.
wrong side of history. I'd say. I know there's some a lot of well, people have been commenting, so I want to see if there's any questions that people have for
Oh,
you. Or
I've been deliberately not looking at the chat.
yes, I
I do have one quick thing to say about what
yeah,
you said about the outsider and outcast, and how we're all outsiders to something. With Satanism in particular, I would even be more specific and say scapegoat. because when you're cast in the role of the scapegoat, even as a young kid, and you have internal family systems and the role of the scapegoat, I think you end up in that role in future groups, and like people just sense or they just know that you've been using that role before, so you're already primed to play that role. So you can end up as the scapegoat for a lot of different groups. You end up in a way that like everyone ends up as an outcast or an outsider of some group, but they don't always maybe end up as a scapegoat. And with Satanism in
Sure,
particular,
sure.
there's that kind of temptation to scapegoat. It makes we
Yes.
make very attractive scapegoats.
I see what you're saying. Yes, 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 yes. Um, okay, let's see if anyone has any questions for you. Greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist. Archetypally, perhaps.
Yes.
Um,
Exist in here.
let's see. $5. Someone donated $5. Appreciate it. Is it true that Satan works as Yahweh's prison warden and attorney general?
In the Hebrew Bible, he was the adversary, which that's kind of what the role he played then. I personally, I find the figure of Christ, the figure of Satan, to be complements, not contraries. I I find they can work like one gives what the other
Sure.
doesn't, so you have access to the full range.
You know, it's funny. I don't know. Are you a Star Wars fan by any chance?
I watched the original one growing up. I vaguely
Okay.
remember them, but it didn't
And
stick with me much. I
I'm get
remember her in the trash compactor getting
yes,
squeezed as a
yes.
tentacle monster.
Okay. Well, so Star Wars is all about the light side of the Force and the dark side of the Force.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
it's
yeah.
very
The
religious archetype,
the
right?
Zoroastrian Manichaeism.
Yeah, very Manichaean, right? And my hot take is that there actually are no good Star Wars movies except for Rogue One, but that's a separate discussion I can have with a fellow Star Wars zealot. However, the reason I'm a huge Star Wars fan is because they have several good video games. One of the best video games of all time across all types of video games, in my opinion, is called Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. It's basically a Star Wars role playing game. And the thing that makes it so good is that it steps away from the Manichaean, like Jedi are good, Sith are evil, light and dark, and it puts it on a what you just described, which is a more like Christ versus Satan is like they're complementary, where it's more like an order and chaos type thing, where the Jedi are the game goes through it and it highlights how the Jedi, because they suppress emotion, they suppress like Jedi are not supposed to have relationships and all that, so they suppress that aspect. They deny what it means to be human, so they have this sort of stale ossification that causes them to be like intellectually arrogant and think they're right all the time. And then the Sith are more like we embrace passion and all that. And so it's a much more sophisticated and I would say realistic view of like opposing forces rather than just one is above the other, right? Um, and
I
so
like that. Yeah, I can
yeah,
relate to that.
yeah,
And
it's
in Jungian thought, you have the shadow, yeah, the self and the shadow.
right. Yes, and yes, and so yeah, it explores that in particular. I was gonna do videos about Knights of the Republic saying something like, "This has got to be Jordan Peterson's favorite video game," but anyway.
Oh.
Um, I'm curious to know if Jeff engages in any ritual practices. Do you do any embodied rituals, or is it more
I
philosophical?
I'm really bad with routine and structure. I intend to I don't do any like theatrical, dramatic, spooky, satanic rituals, although I'd
No,
love to try.
no demon summoning, no
I
circles.
did when I was younger. In my 20s, I was like I was pagan and did some ceremonial magic stuff, and I played around with that. But right now, that sounds just like a lot of work. I have visualizations I do like to just help me through different little moments. I
Sure,
could call up some visualizations. I don't do anything formal or structured in general. I would like to maybe develop some just to get a feel for it and to say I did it. So like
sure.
it's one more badge in my Satanism. But right now, no, I don't.
Got it. Got it. Yeah,
But
ritual.
if I did, they would be rituals that I created and developed on my
Sure,
own
they're
based on
personal.
whatever needs I'm creating them for.
Yeah, yeah. It's ritual is sort of a it's a non-obvious necessary part of any community, and what you describe it what people describe as ritual, they think like satanic ritual, like a a specific, very obvious thing. But like even just like getting up and saying the Pledge of Allegiance. That's a ritual, or even just coming together and just like it's
I mean, yeah, there's
a morning stand up meeting if you at work. That's ritualistic in that hey, if every morning when you get to work at 8:30 everyone gets together and just says hey, here's the agenda for today, blah blah blah. That's ritualistic, and
yeah.
being able to rely on that is part of what goes into your conception of what makes it a community, right?
There's social rituals, and like even your podcast, you're trying to figure out the
Mm-hmm.
ritual, the right structure for your podcast. And
Yeah,
so much of our communication, just verbal communication, is ritualized. And as an autistic person, I could observe a lot of those ritual patterns that people just repeat or play out with each other, and above and beyond the substance or the content
right.
of the
All
actual
right.
communication.
Side note: do you think that everyone is on the spectrum, or is that just kind of
I
a
I
dismissal?
think it's a threshold diagnosis. So I think the picture is way more complex than the current clinical picture captures. Right now, they think there can be as many as maybe 1,000 genetic factors involved. So I'd find it hard to believe that one individual person doesn't have some combination of them influencing them. But if it doesn't rise through a certain threshold where it's not prominent or noticeable or doesn't impair functioning, then it's possible to still have some
Sure.
neurodivergence and not
Yep.
be aware of it or even know or call it being on the spectrum.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I think it's up for each person to kind of determine where they fit on that umbrella.
That's fair. I asked my therapist point blank one time if he thought I was autistic. And to be honest, I don't remember what he said, which makes me
Do
think
you
he
think
said
you are?
no.
It-
No, because when I went to therapy, I was very, I had like a strong desire to find a label, like, because I had all these problems. I didn't know what they were. I was just, living life. Well, it was in the middle of the pandemic, right? I think I went in June of 2020. So right at the height of the Black Lives Matter riots and height of the being isolated because I lived on my own. So and then there were just all these other personal problems I was having. So I basically I went in and I was like I want a label, whether it's am I autistic, am I schizophrenic, am I narcissist, I just throwing these labels out, and um and and it was interesting because I learned that there's different approaches to therapy, and and my therapist was more Jungian, I guess, psychoanalytical, and his perspective is like there's an entire school of therapy that doesn't even believe in like not even believe, but doesn't use like autism, or, like autism diagnosis, schizophrenia. It's all complexes. What's like the Oedipal complex and all that different shit, right? Like from a
mm,
Jungian perspective. And so which, you know, I think like I think each different schools of therapy should be tailored to each different person. And because I happen to be someone who's more interested in like
absolutely.
Jung and all that stuff, that method worked for me. But I can understand a more like behaviorist approach. Like if someone really is like autistic, like I don't know, you or whoever like maybe someone would benefit, like they don't really get much value from talking about like stories and myth and all that. Like they just get like, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? Let's break it down, right? A more
Something
behavioral.
really practical.
Yeah. So I get that. So no, but I went in because I don't know. I was, it was more just like I said, I was reaching for a label. I was throwing out any label or whatever, and that was part of what I learned in therapy. Is like, Paul, why are you so eager to get a label or whatever? I'm like, well, what the conclusion I came to was like, because then I can pin all my problems to that, and then say, oh well, if I'm this, that, or the third, this is why I'm struggling, rather than like, well, maybe it's because I'm undisciplined and because I, don't put in the effort, or I don't have the right attitude in different ways and all that. So
It
yeah.
could be a starting point. Just like Satanism, like the figure of Satan is an organizing principle. It can serve
Mm.
as an
Sure.
organizing principle for your. I would say just from the little impression I've had of you, I wouldn't call you neurotypical.
Yeah, well, most neurotypical people are not making YouTube videos that start off by um, saying that I'm non-binary or something like that. So, yes, I've long known I am not. But see, it comes to this is why I asked about the spectrum thing. Is like the neurotypical label is difficult because I don't think anyone is truly neurotypical because we're all
No
unique,
two brains are alike.
Right. So I think it gets squirrely because on the one
Yeah,
hand, everyone is different, but you also want to acknowledge like well, if someone's like schizophrenic, to pretend like, oh, well, they're just different. It's like, well, it's not that they're just different. Like, they're different in a way that is worth labeling, is worth categorizing them differently from other people, so that they can be accommodated properly, right? Because if someone's schizophrenic and you're just like, well, just put yourself together, just like, ignore the voices inside your head. That's not a very sophisticated approach.
That's why I'm very traits focused. Like if you have particular traits or characteristics that catch your attention, or that you want to explore or change or learn about your cognitive processing, or if you
Yeah.
think in a certain way, I home in on the individual traits and don't worry so much about the labels or
Yeah, yeah.
categorization.
I think that's fair. Yeah. Let's see. Tom Holland's Dominion also sees woke as a Christian heresy, specifically of the Protestants. Maybe.
Well, it has roots in Plato and the Republic, but I think it also has roots in early Christianity as it tried to establish itself as a religion.
Tom Holland's Dominion. Isn't Tom Holland the actor who plays Spider-Man? Or am I thinking of someone else?
Oh, no.
Okay, that's fair. Let's see. I smoke cigarettes, but never in front of my family. I'm 31. Good idea. Let's see. P.S. Young. Do I watch 6X and Hammer? I used to watch 6X and Hammer.
Oh yeah, I do follow him.
Are you a fan of 6X and Hammer? He seems like he
pretty, shows up on my YouTube.
Yeah, same. He's pretty level-headed generally, although he's a little bit too libertarian for me. Let's see. Outsider, the corporate world has weakened their individuality. Yes. I don't think anyone disagrees with live and let live. Paul, do you think this guy would get on well with... Yeah. I don't think... there are definitely people who disagree with live and let live. Paul, do I think this guy, referring to Jeff, would get on well with Andrew Wilson? Andrew Wilson is a fun guy and respectable and has shown me great respect. But I'm pretty sure he would. You don't know who Andrew Wilson's the guy who hosted the debate on the Crucible.
Oh, the guy at the bottom?
Yes, the guy who just kind of sat
there. Okay. Yeah,
and,
he didn't do too much, but his he was kind of a little policey. I know that was his role, but
yeah,
I haven't trait reacted. So you've been watching him do that. But maybe one-on-one.
He's great. Every time I talk to him, we have wildly different views on the world. But
I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to testing it out.
Yeah, well, go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, so one thing that just for people watching, again, we're talking about ritual. I'm trying to do this more regularly, where it's like Saturday mornings, Sunday mornings, one or both, to do these streams, and I can bring people on and talk, and maybe do like panels as well. So it's not just me talking to one other person, but bring a couple people on. I think once it gets to more than 4, that gets too chaotic, I think. But yeah, so I was thinking about actually the other day asking about
we had most of my podcasts were panels.
Yeah. So that's interesting.
I wanted to ask you when I got on. I was trying to figure out who this little Joel was, the Satanism.
Oh, he's
thing that you mentioned. I tried to find him on the internet, but I didn't see anything.
I think Big Joel. There's a guy named Joel, and he has 2 YouTube channels. Big Joel for his long video essays, and then Little Joel is like his little clips. Big Goel, and he's kind of a left-wing video essayist type guy, who's kind of goofy in my opinion. But yeah, I guess he did things.
He did something on Satanism, Little Joel. Ooh,
I guess someone was saying that.
Does he have the wild hair and the eyes?
Yeah, he's a little disheveled looking. Zen Shapiro, the only person I've ever destroyed in a debate about abortion. We Orthodox Christians do not agree with live and let live. Yes, I'm aware, Zen.
I have a good friend who's Orthodox.
Yeah, Orthodoxy's making its return. I bet there's a strong chance that Jordan Peterson might convert to Orthodox Christianity. I've seen him going down this path, and that would be very interesting. That would be a shakeup in the theological.
It's appealing to a lot of people. I know, isn't Jonathan Peugeot?
Yeah.
Orthodox. I mean, me and my friend fight and argue all the time because he's very rigid about some of his thinking. But outside of that, a lot of the mythological stuff and symbolic stuff, we very much are simpatico with.
Yeah. Eastern Orthodox. I went to a liturgy a while back because my friend's Greek Orthodox, and I have to say, it's about as boring as Catholic Mass. Eastern Orthodox
Oh.
Mass and Catholic Mass are a lot of very boring, in my
I
opinion.
was an altar boy growing up. I went to a Catholic mass for Christmas. My mom taught me to go in for the first time since probably I was a teenager.
Really?
And I was really a lot of things have changed. They have like female altar girls, the head altar person, the altar lady. They
Sure.
changed some of the prayers around, but I was very impressed with the people that showed up. They were leaving their house on Christmas Day to come and do something socially, like to contribute to something larger than themselves and make a positive contribution to society. There were some single men that just kind of showed up by themselves and participated in the mass, and
Yeah.
something really struck me about that.
Yeah. The community aspect, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I think everyone has this. Like for me, grew up very religious, went to like church camp, memorized the Bible verses, all that stuff.
Oh.
Then I was like a militant atheist where I would like make fun of my friends, be like, "Oh, you believe in a bearded man in the sky? You're so stupid. Look how smart I am because I'm mocking you." And then now I'm like, there's something there. There's something of
There's
value there.
something there.
Bo Burnham even, and Bo Burnham's like the classic, edgy atheist teenager type guy, and he was on a podcast a year or two ago saying, but basically the same thing, like, oh yeah, it's really cool to make fun of like religious people, but then it's like there's people who are a lot smarter than you that are religious, so it's not inherently a dumb idea. It's like, yes.
Oh yeah, yes, I'm very a lot of the intellectuals that I'm finding that are religious, I'm very impressed by. I was in the atheist group when I lived in Vegas, and we'd meet every week at a restaurant, chat, and all we talked about was how we didn't believe in God. Like there was no other basis for conversation. I'd rather hang out with Christians or
Yeah,
religious people, have interesting conversations than
that's funny.
atheists.
Yeah. If you define yourself as being in opposition to the very thing, you're letting that define that for you. But let's see. Let's go back to script brain. What happens? What if in the Bible Satan's fall represents our left brain usurping the right, master and emissary?
I don't know. I kind of see it as
ransack
God
the
as the left brain
master and
trying
emissary.
to. Oh, my roommate has that book. I
Yeah,
was browsing through it the other day.
I go to the bar and have a few beers, and as I'm reading it, I'm always like, oh my god, and I'm writing notes in it and stuff. And right when I'm about 2 beers in is when all the ideas are hitting me, like, oh my god, this is incredible.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, I think the common representation is if you consider the left brain like the intellect, is it Mephistopheles, the Mephistophelian version of Lucifer is like the pure rationality.
Perhaps. I mean, you're trying to map two different paradigms
Yeah,
onto each
yeah,
other
yeah.
anyway. But a lot of my Satanism comes from, I was a literature major, so Romanticism, Milton, William Blake, Shelley. There was a whole little satanic movement, Byron, in the Romantic movement. And a lot of that was like more privileging emotion and intuition over sterile rationality from the Enlightenment, which
Sure.
preceded it. So you have that kind of dichotomy that showed up in these discussions before, but you can you can do both. You can see God as the rational, controlling figure, and Satan as the passionate, rebellious element, or you could see, like this person said, as God as the more healthy, stable, emotional life, and Satan as
Sure. The
the one that
chaos
tries
kind
to
of.
rationalize its way out of obedience.
Right. Yep.
That's why I think it's large enough to carry many meanings, which is
Sure.
another advantage I think Satanism has. It's very flexible as a religion.
Right. And then Zen Shapiro says, "Cringe PF." Well, that's fine, Zen. You can live in your silly world. Okay. Well, I think I'm gonna end it here. We can definitely speak again. I'd love to have you on again. I'm gonna, like I said, I'm gonna do these panels and just kind of bring people together who I think will pick a topic and then get different perspectives on it. And it'd be nice to kind of do that on a regular basis. So I'd
Yeah,
absolutely
that sounds like fun.
love to have you back on. But I really appreciate this conversation. I'm very glad that Anton and I were talking about Satan, and you happen to be in the chat for
Me
when
too.
that is. So
Yeah.
that's awesome. Is there anything you want to plug or say or?
No, you can find me on Twitter at Primal Hex. It's my Twitter handle, and I'm going to be launching a YouTube channel soon, along with my website, that's going to focus on men's mental health, and we're going to do podcasts around that and have guests on, so you can follow that too. Right now, my current channel, which I don't use very often anymore, is on my Twitter profile.
Right on. Okay. Got it. Yeah.
And I guess I have a men's group that meets every Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. It's just kind of a informal drop-in chat session. So if you're interested in that, you can contact me and I can give you the link.
Okay. Yeah. I think I'm gonna upload this. I'm gonna cut it up and blurb out certain slurs, even though you're a member of the community.
I don't want to jeopardize your channel.
Well, that's fair. And to be honest, like, if like the YouTube's rule is if you're a member of a marginalized community, you can use the slurs of that. You know what I'm saying? So technically, that's not a problem. But I'll do some post editing just to be safe.
Okay.
But I'll include a link to your Twitter and any other links you want to send me. So
okay,
we can do that. But
well,
cool.
Thanks for having me on. I love podcasting. I love chatting with you.
Yes.
Anytime.
Heck yes. Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it. And hail Satan, right?
Hail Satan.
Hail Satan.
I don't think that's Hitler.
Oh, all right. Hail Satan. Yes. All right. All right. Peace, Jeff.
Okay. You
Bye.
too. Take care.